Hi, everyone. I am thrilled to welcome you to the Everywhere Book Fest. I am Amy Alznauer, and this is our panel. To write a STEAM book, you must fall in love. So two things about that. First, STEAM means science, technology, engineering, architecture, and mathematics. And we're going to be focusing on the M part of that, the mathematics part. But you can make an association between any of those other subjects and math. The second thing is Daniel and I are not in love. Actually, I am in love with Daniel because his art is so beautiful, but shh. So we are not in love, all right? This is about falling in love with the story you're writing, and in particular, the odd association between math and love. But before I do anything else, I want to introduce our wonderful sign language interpreter, Jenny. And Jenny, I'm actually going to sign for a minute. So I myself am thrilled because my mother and father-in-law are both deaf and they are watching today. So now I'm going to stop signing. So back to Jenny. So thank you so much to the Everywhere Book Fest for making this festival not only everywhere, but for everyone. So again, I'm Amy Alznauer, and this is the book, The Boy Who Dreamed of Infinity, from Candlewick Press that I wrote. It's actually available now, and there's links on our website for you to buy it. So I will be talking about this book today with Daniel, and he'll be introducing himself in a minute. But I also wanted to share with you a second book I have out this spring. It's called The Strange Birds of Flannery O'Connor. It's out from Enchanted Lion Books, and it's illustrated by Ping Zhu. So I want to turn it over to Daniel now so he can introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Miyares, and I had the extreme fortune and honor of illustrating this book with Amy. I did actually fall in love with this story, and I really do have to hug it. It's one of those books. So you'll hear more about how this process worked for me, but it really is important to have a heart for these stories that you make, and I'm excited to get to share that and stick around, because later on in the presentation I'm going to be doing a live demo, a live drawing demo, and something that you can follow along and do yourself later on. But let's get on with the rest of the show. And before we do that, I want to mention that in the comments areas of whatever platform you're watching from, enter comments, your questions that you have, enter those, and they're going to be monitored. So later on, we'll do a Q&A, and they'll be pulled from those postings. So please fire away. And nothing's off the table as far as I'm concerned, but have fun with that. And also, there are books available through booksellers. There's links on the Everywhere Book Fest website that you can check into if you want to purchase books. Okay, so without further ado, Amy, back to you.
Okay, so Daniel's very humble, but he has illustrated many books. So look Daniel up. They're beautiful. He has, I don't know how many, Daniel. How many books have you illustrated? He's pointing behind him.
I don't know, a baker's dozen or so, probably about
okay.
15.
All right.
I do have a book about Rachel Carson coming out with the amazing Deborah Wiles called Night Walk to the Sea. Can't wait. September 15th that releases, but you'll hear more about that from me later on.
All right, great. Well, so I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing today. So this is, as I said, bringing the idea of love and mathematics together. So I'm going to be telling you my story that actually stretches back to when I was a child and taking you inside of the book. And then Daniel is going to talk about coming at this book from the point of view of an artist, not a math person, and doing some live drawing, which I'm personally really excited about, some drawing that brings together art and mathematics. But first of all, I just want to say, I get it if you don't see the connection right off between math and love. So I write children's books, but I also teach mathematics. And here is the book that I use with my students. You see this giant tome, and the last quarter inch of that is the answers at the back of the book. So where is the creativity, right? Where is the love in that? where if the answers are already known, how are you actually discovering anything? How can that be seen as creative? So that's the challenge for me, a very big challenge as a teacher and as a writer, to show people that math actually goes so far beyond that and has this incredible creativity, adventure, love behind it. So I'm going to take you inside this book in just a second, but it's the story of a little boy who grew up in South India over 100 years ago. And we actually just passed the anniversary, the 100th anniversary of his death. And he died when he was only 32 years old. So instead of just showing you the pictures from here, I thought I would take you inside the actual book. So I'm going to ask our producer right now to bring us over. I'm going to switch over myself. So one thing that's interesting about this boy when he was growing up is he didn't say a word until he was 3 years old. And you see him here lining up the copper pots across the floor. And I like to think he was already thinking about patterns. A couple years later, well, so during this time when he wasn't speaking, his mother was extremely concerned about him, right? So she took him to see his grandfather. And you see his grandfather here leading him through an ancient Hindu ritual, which was to take the child's hand and make their finger trace letters and numbers in rice. And shortly after that, when he was still 3, he began to talk. And he was full of these creative questions. And his family actually wrote these down in the record book. He asked questions like, who was the first man in the world? What is small? And he looked up at the big blue space between clouds and thought, what is big? But then when he was 5 years old, he went to school, and the teacher did not like these odd questions. So Ramanujan in turn hated school, and he ran away from his teachers and classmates again and again. But when he was alone, his mind raced with questions, and they started to center on questions about mathematics. And I want you to notice where he's sitting, writing on this slate in front of that beautiful Hindu temple. So I'm going to come back to that later. But I want to take you through just one of his imaginings. So imagine he had a mango. A mango was his favorite food, right? He had a mango. He chopped it in half, and then he took that half and chopped that in half, took that half and chopped that in half, and conceivably he could keep on going forever, chopping the halves in half, on forever, ever, to an infinity he could never, ever reach. But then he could put all of those little pieces back together until he had a single mango. So he had cracked the number 1 open and found infinity. So what a thrilling discovery to find infinity inside the number 1. So he started writing these ideas down in a notebook, almost like you would write down ideas for your art or ideas for a novel, in a diary, in a notebook, in a daily exercise. So he wrote these ideas down, inventing his own symbols, recreating most of the known mathematics in the world from his own mind, using this strange green ink, and then going far beyond anything that anybody had ever thought in mathematics. So he began eventually feeling quite lonely because no one understood his ideas, and he began to write letters. And you see here is the famous letter he wrote to Professor G.H. Hardy at Trinity College at Cambridge University in England. And now if we could switch back over just for a minute to me. So he actually wrote this letter to G.H. Hardy, and Hardy brought him to England, and they collaborated for 4 years and did this earth-shattering, amazing mathematics that really made Ramanujan, in the eyes of the mathematical community, a once in a millennium type of genius. But then, tragically, after 4 years, he became fatally ill, and he returned to India, and he actually died. But on his deathbed, he was still doing mathematics. He was still writing out these notebook pages, and he wrote one single letter to G.H. Hardy, and he talked about what he called the mock theta functions, which my father thinks he might have named for Lewis Carroll's mock turtle. If you know that story, the mock turtle is always crying. Anyway, so he wrote this last letter, and then after he died, his mathematics just faded out of human awareness. People stopped working on it. No one was thinking about it. So now let's go back into my slides and pick up right where we left off. There's the letter. That could also have been that last letter that he sent. And now fast forward in time about a half a century, a little over half a century. And here I am, 5 years old, and I am in England with Lucy Slater. This is Cambridge, England, with Lucy Slater. She was a brilliant mathematician herself. It actually says on her gravestone, computer engineer. But back in her day, when she was a student at Trinity College in Cambridge, some of her teachers back in their day, when they were young, they were living and working with Ramanujan. So she was this living link between Ramanujan's time and our time. And she told my father, who was a mathematician and was visiting her, she told him about these boxes of papers that were kept from these mathematicians at Trinity College, the Wren Library there. So my father thought, hey, why not? Why not just go and take a look and see what's there? So he went into the Wren Library, which is this beautiful, imposing building, and he went into the stacks and he located this box, and I love to imagine it with dust all over it, blowing off the dust, and he started looking through it. And this is what he saw. And at the time, no other living mathematician really could have recognized this for what it was, because as I said, no one was thinking about Ramanujan's work. But my father had actually written his dissertation on the Mach theta functions. And there you can see it says Mach theta functions. This is one of those pages. And he realized he was holding in his hands the handwritten work Ramanujan had done on his deathbed, and even this last letter to G.H. Hardy. So people have likened this to someone discovering the 10th Symphony of Beethoven. So this is what I remember from the trip. I was a little girl. I was on the boat, this boat. We were feeding the ducks, and I was vaguely aware of my father standing at the back of the boat holding this long punting pole. And on this river, we were actually floating right in front of the Wren Library. So his thoughts were racing, and at some point, I think he was, his mind was in the clouds, and he slipped and fell off and splashed in the river. And for me now, that splash has taken on mythic significance. And I think of it as representing that moment when my father was able to reach across time, across cultures, across continents, to connect with the mind of this incredible genius. So this moment had such an impact on my life as a little girl. I ended up going to India to walk in Ramanujan's footsteps, and you see me here standing with some people who have devoted their lives to maintaining Ramanujan's legacy. And I walked on the streets where Ramanujan walked. So here's a little clip from a documentary. That's that street I showed you before. And this is Ramanujan's little house that has since been renovated. And I went there and tried to take in as much of that world that shaped his creative imagination. And I want to show you one last image here. This is from his high school, and I love this image of these buckets that are used to put out fires, but it says in both Tamil and in English, fire. So let's come back to me now. And so I love that image because it talks about fire, right? The fire of love, the fire of creativity. So what I hoped for more than anything else when I wrote this book and sent it off to Candlewick, and a lot of people don't know this, but I don't illustrate it, first of all, and I don't get to pick the illustrator. So what I hoped is that Candlewick would find somebody who could get inside the mind of this little boy and bring all of that joy and magic and love into images. So I was thrilled when they picked Daniel, and I'm going to turn it over to him now to talk about not only his relationship to this story, but to do some live drawing. So get your pens and paper ready. All right, over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Amy. when I first received this manuscript, you know, as an illustrator, I often get manuscripts to read, stories that aren't published yet. And so when I first got this story, I thought immediately, well, for one, it was beautifully written and it was a wonderful story, but I didn't know that I was the right person to do it because it was all about math. And and if I don't have a personal connection to the story, it's really hard for me to think about spending so many months in the better part of 2 years, like working on something like this. And so I said, well, you know what? I need to sleep on it. And the more I considered it as days and possibly even a couple of weeks went by before we, you know, gave our final word on it, you know, I had to think about, you know, what does this story mean to me? And I thought, how am I going to communicate that to you today? So what I thought is I would use my original art as my slides and share with you how I connected to this story, because that's really, I mean, that's, I have to fall in love with it if I'm going to make a book out of it. So first of all, the story is about Ramanujan, right? This wonderful child, and it's about him growing up, right? And so I had to think, well, what does he mean to me? I was no mathematician. I'm not from India, obviously, and you know, and quite frankly, I didn't really know much about that part of the world. And so, but what I did understand when I started looking closer at this story was that, you know what, he was a shy little kid, right? And Amy talked about this moment where he's lining up the pots in the kitchen. Um, I was a shy little kid. I always drew. I was an artist. I knew from the time I picked up a pencil that I wanted to be an artist when I grew up, you know, professional or unprofessional, you know. But then also another way I connected with him was that, you know, he spent a lot of his life in notebooks. I have hundreds of sketchbooks littered around my house. You know, notebooks are so important to me. From the time I was in the third grade, I had a teacher give me my first sketchbook. And ever since then, I fill them up with all of my ideas, all of my thoughts. They're private until I share them, much like his work, right? And then the real kicker for me was that Ramanujan, numbers were his passion during his waking moments, but also while he slept. You know, he couldn't get away from thinking about, you know, how to create and move within these numbers. And I feel much the same way about what I create. It's really hard. The stories I make are the ones that I lose sleep over. You know, that's just it. Those are the ones that I'm compelled to make. And finally, what really tugs at my heartstrings when he leaves to go to England, right? When he leaves his family, his home, everything he knows to head off to do this thing he knew he was meant to do. That was me. You know, when I was 18 years old, I packed my grandfather's World War II duffel bag and I headed off to art school. I had enough money to go for one semester. That's all I knew. But I felt compelled to do it. And it led me down this whole path where I'm heading now. But this moment in the book is at the end, and to me is a really important connection for me. And I knew it from just reading the words on the page. That was it. And so as I got into making this book, there's some important things that happened. I had to research who he was, what his life was like. And one thing that came out of it was the idea of kolams. Now, kolams are a decorative art that is practiced in India in particular, and some other countries as well. But in India, in southern India, they're called kolams. And Amy introduced me to them. And I was looking for elements to use in decorative elements in the book or clothing. And Amy said, why don't you investigate kolams? And so then I started researching them and learning about them. And it's an art form that is practiced mostly by women in India, but I had to go pretty deep on learning this and understand why they're used and how they do them on the ground in front of their homes. And it's an art form, but it's also intertwined with their faith and how they see themselves within their culture. And to me, that was math at work too. And you'll see what I mean in a second when we do the demo here. So, so yeah, I encourage you to go investigate them in particular. If you want to learn more about them, we can share some information, but I had to go deep. And, you know, you'll see the at the beginning and end of the book, I felt like it was really important to bookend the story with these types of designs. And because they represent the structure and the form and the thinking behind really complex math, but it's a beautiful expression of it, which I love, and it's a visual expression of it, which is what I'm all about. So anyway, Amy, if you have anything you want to add there, go right ahead. I want to jump over to the artboard. If you guys want to join me, I can do my little demo, and I'll remind you again, add questions into the chat as we go, so that you know, we can answer some questions at the end. Okay.
All right. Well, Daniel's switching over. I'm just going to show you this slate that I got in India. It's actually a slate that somebody gave me that would have been somewhat like the slates that Ramanujan had. And on the other side of it, I have drawn the simplest, one of the simplest columns you could possibly draw, and that is the infinity symbol. And you can see, and Daniel will be showing you exactly how this works. But often the people who drew these linked the idea of a column with infinity. So I think Daniel will be over at his screen in a second there.
All right. I am. So what I learned about columns is that I thought they were done just with such ease and amazement that, like, there was no structure. Women just drew these ornate designs and they looked perfect, and that really confused me. I didn't understand how to do that, and I failed miserably at it when I started. But what I learned upon further investigation, there's these dot patterns, right? So you see how these dots are all lined up equally. This column that I'm going to show you is pretty simple, but I think it's complex enough to keep you busy for a while. This one's called a 5x1, but basically it's if you think of a grid, it's wide 5 dots. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 this way, and then tall 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's a few extra here, and you'll see how I'm going to use those as well. But what I'm going to be doing is using this pen. This is called a parallel pen, but you don't have to use this. Normally these are drawn on the ground using rice powder. And the powder is spread in designs, but I'm going to draw it on paper to communicate the idea. But okay, here we go. Now you can't see this probably, but my tongue's going to stick out of the side of my mouth because I'm trying hard. But here we go. All right, and I'm left-handed, so I can ruin this at any moment. But basically, I'm going to be slaloming like a skier through these dots. Okay. And an interesting fact, you always end where you begin. So it's like a journey. And now this is a pretty simple one, but the idea of what I love about it is, for one, you end where you begin, but it's a continuous line, much like the way we live our lives, right? You're at any given point, you're at any point on this line. There's no, there's no switching over to separate lines. It's you are where you are, and you keep on going, which I love. And I love the fact that it requires this almost knowing where you're going, but not knowing at the same time, and letting go. That's what I love about them. But anyway, this is called a and I'll write it here. This is called I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but a siku kolam. And it's a 5x1. Okay, there's a lot of them. There's really large ones with a lot of intersecting things, but this is one that you can do, and I'm going to actually do a video of this and post it to my YouTube channel later on. It's just called Daniel Miyares, and so I'll do a more step-by-step. I'll number the dots and show you exactly how you can do this too. Okay, so let's switch back over.
Okay,
and,
great.
Possibly do some Q&A.
Great. So I just wanted, while Daniel's, oh, we're already switched back. That's wonderful. Oh, well, he's coming over. So let me just show you something really quick. Daniel said that we started and ended at the same point to make a kolam. And I just wanted to make that connection for you with storytelling, both artistic and in words. At the beginning of our book, you see that Ramanujan is there with his mother, and she's showing him the moon and the stars, which is an iconic image of motherhood in South India. That the mothers would wrap their children in saris and show them the moon and the stars. And you see that at the very end of the book, and Daniel showed you his original painting of this scene, Ramanujan is on this boat looking up at that same night sky. So you see that we've come full circle. And so stories begin and end at the same place. You see that taking place in art. You see that in the symmetries of mathematics. So hopefully we've made you fall in love with math just a little bit. And now, as I said, we'd love to take some questions.
Absolutely.
So
Okay,
Daniel, do you want to read the first one there?
Yeah, here we go. Let's see, is this Elowin, age 10? What's the hardest part about making a book? Okay. Gosh, there's lots of hard things about making a book, lots of pitfalls in my opinion, but for me, it's finding that personal hook, or the thing that personal connection to the book that I really want to express. Because once you have that, for me, once I have that direction, the rest is just exploration. The rest is just expressing that same idea over and over and over again with my art.
Yeah, I would also add that when you first have that passion, that spark that leads you to the story, that's the falling in love part. And then there is the execution, right? And that has moments of passion and love, but it also has really difficult moments where you hit a barrier. And so you have to push yourself to keep falling in love with the story that you originally imagined. So it's kind of an ongoing process. And I think that is something that can be really difficult. So how about another question? Okay, this is from Amanda Street. I'm curious about how authors and illustrators of STEAM books balance the math science aspects with the story so that neither drowns out the other. So actually, let me just take a stab at that really quick. For me, the story is the most important, because a lot of math books are sort of written around a mathematical concept, which makes the math makes the story second to the math. But I think in order to really fall in love with anything, the mechanism of that necessarily takes the form of a story. A lot of mathematicians describe the process of doing mathematics as a journey, as an adventure, as walking in a garden, as walking in a jungle, as they use all of these metaphors to try to explain it. And it has that story form. So to me, the story was the number one. And then that story, the metaphors started to occur to me that would allow the reader to sort of naturally get into mathematics. But do you have anything you want to add to that, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, what you said is beautiful. I feel like books aren't books unless there's a story to it, no matter what you're creating. I mean, if you're reading popular mechanics, I mean, there's stories within, what it's trying to convey. There's a story to the way the dictionary is put together. But from my point of view, first and foremost, I had a lot of anxiety around doing a book like this, because for one, it's a responsibility to take on these ideas, and in particular, the richness and wholeness of someone's life. To me, that I had a lot of anxiety about that, but I had to work through that in my research and gain confidence, And I was fortunate because the publisher Candlewick and Amy herself just bombarded me with great resources and great research, and and actually shared what was in their hearts about what they thought was really valuable about this story, and it just served me well to take clear cues from them and to pay attention. If I just said, well, I know what I'm doing here, and then shoved everything to the side, that would be a recipe for disaster.
So let me just say one little thing on that. We are going to have to wrap up, but I just wanted to say one little addition to what Daniel just said. So I worked with a lot of people from the part of the world that Ramanujan was from. I worked with Tamil scholars. I worked with mathematicians from the Tamil Nadu, where Ramanujan was from, to really make sure that the cultural representations were correct. Because even though I was writing within my mathematical tradition, I was writing outside of my cultural tradition. So it was really important to have those people there. And I thank a lot of them in the acknowledgments of the book. But anyway, we are at our limit. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the Everywhere Book Fest. And Daniel, do you want to say a few words to say goodbye?
No, you know what? I just appreciate all of you for showing up and tuning in on your Saturday morning. And thank you to the Everywhere Book Fest for hosting us. And thank you to Candlewick. Amy, you're amazing. I think that. So yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.